Hi there, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar about the proposed changes to the ACUHO-I Constitution as it relates to the annual business meeting. My name is Holly, and I'll be serving as your technical host for today's program. If at any time during the presentation you have any tech issues, please send those my way so I can assist. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items, and then I'll pass it over to Pete and Mary. The first is how you participate in the program. Today we'll be using our chat and Q&A function on Zoom to communicate with each other. The chat can be used to communicate peer-to-peer. The Q&A can be used to submit questions to our panelists. This program will be recorded, so if you missed this or would like to refer another colleague to the program, you will be able to do so. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. And with that, I will turn it over to Pete and Mary.
Thank you very much, Holly. Hello, everybody, and yes, thank you for joining us on this webinar about the annual business meeting and the constitutional changes that go along with that. We'll be providing a little bit of context for you about what we are proposing, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers, as Holly alluded to. So on the screen here, you see the actual change that we're proposing to the Constitution. Currently, there's a call for the annual business meeting to be conducted during each conference and expo. So that's the time that we're together, generally in June and July of every single year with our major in-person events. That obviously wasn't able to happen these past 2 years because we did not have an in-person annual conference and expo, and the business meeting was virtual at a slightly different time. What we would propose is to then make that official, so to speak. So you see the proposed language for the revised Constitution, indicating that the business meeting will still happen, but it would happen before March 31 of each year, and it would be in a virtual format as opposed to an in-person format as we've been doing. So some of the rationale behind this, you can see listed here. A major one is to eliminate barriers to participation when we have an annual business meeting at the annual conference and expo. Obviously, only those people that are able to attend the conference are then also able to participate in the annual business meeting. Given that we are a membership association, being able to have it at a different time in a different format certainly opens it up to a lot more people being able to participate. Then the second is about best practices for timing and administration. Right now, our annual business meeting is 6 to 7 months after the end of our previous calendar year, fiscal year, and officer leadership year. So in order to be a little more timely with the information that we provide, particularly around the finances, it makes sense to move the meeting earlier in the calendar year as it's reflecting the finances of the previous fiscal year that ends on December 31. So in terms of our next steps, the voting period for the constitutional change will be, as noted here on the screen, Monday, November 29th. Starting at 12 noon Eastern time US, and then going through the following Friday till the very end of the day, 11:59 p.m. As it states, as is required by the Constitution, 2/3 of voting members are required to change or amend it, not 2/3 of overall membership, just 2/3 of those that end up participating in the voting process, which we certainly hope most institutions will do. So now there's an opportunity for some questions. Mary, I know you have some questions, and there might be some questions from those participating as well.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We do have questions that were submitted in advance. Some of these questions are coming from people who are on the webinar. Others are from members that we have talked to or who have responded to the news once it was announced in Connections. Most of the questions are related to the annual business meeting, but there are a few other questions that some of our members might also have. So with that, I invite the folks who are on this webinar to use the chat function to ask any questions, and we'll get started. So Pete, what kind of feedback have you received from our members about the change in venue from moving it from the annual conference and in person? What are members saying?
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, all the feedback that we've gotten so far has been very positive. The people say it makes sense and actually wonder why we didn't make this change sooner when we changed some other things in terms of our governance structure and timing and things like that. It has been mentioned in the feedback that it does make the meeting more accessible to our members, which is obviously something that we are interested in doing.
Great. We've had our annual business meeting virtually now, first in 2020 and then in 2021. Are we seeing an increase in numbers?
Actually, the numbers have been about the same. But of course, there's a lot going on in the summer, so possibly changing it to summer Northern Hemisphere. So changing it to a spring meeting, Northern Hemisphere, might have the possibility for more engagement and more folks participating during that time frame.
Great, thank you. One of the things, or one of the changes that happened in 2016, 2017 with the annual meeting is, in addition to all the reports that were given out that are required by, a good annual business meeting, we also use that time to solicit feedback from our members. Is there going to be an opportunity for the board to hear feedback from membership?
Absolutely. We intend to have a town hall kind of session where anybody who's in attendance at the conference, whether they're the SHO or the voting member from their institution, can attend. It gives us as an executive board and Mary and the staff an opportunity to meet and hear from our members in terms of what their concerns are and things like that. In addition to our in-person event in June, there's also going to be a virtual event, and there will be a similar opportunity with the town hall during that event as well. And we're always looking for ways that we can provide interactive sessions with our members outside of these formal opportunities as well.
Well, I know that in this past year, Pete, you have been so generous in accepting feedback, giving out your email address to our members, and I expect Pam to be equally accessible as she moves into the role in 2022. This question is, I guess, about the annual business meeting, but it's more about governance in general. And the question is around, it says, can you explain why this decision to change the annual business meeting required a vote of the full membership when so many other decisions that seem to have more of a significance or a more of an impact are decided by the executive board?
Yeah, and that's a great question. ACUHO-I is just like any other incorporated organization. We have a constitution and the bylaws that govern what we do, and there are different processes to go through in order to make changes to those. So again, in this case, there was a clear statement within the Constitution that said that we have to have an annual business meeting, which is a best practice anyway, but also a requirement of Ohio state law, and that's where we're incorporated. And then it also clearly spelled out when that meeting was going to happen. So in order to change the Constitution, it requires that there be a vote of the entire membership. And so we are just following our own guidelines and our own legal practices in order to make this particular change. And again, as noted, there needs to be a 2/3 vote of the membership in order to ratify this kind of change. We also have bylaws, and the bylaws are a little more detailed, but then a little less restrictive in terms of how those get changed. The way our documents read, that the executive board has the ability to amend the bylaws, whereas only the membership can amend the Constitution. And again, if we do any changes to the bylaws, then that also needs a 2/3 vote of the executive board members that are participating in that conversation and that vote. And then, we also, have our attorney and our legal support, works with us on these kinds of things. And again, making sure that we're living by our own standards and guidelines, and giving the membership the opportunity to weigh in on topics at the appropriate time.
Pete, we have a question from the chat, and that is, when was the last time there was a change to the ACUHO-I Constitution?
That was back in 2016, and specifically it was around the inclusion of P3 employees within the association. There had been quite a bit of discussion leading up to that, and the ultimate proposal was that P3 staff that worked on a campus and was kind of under the purview of the SHO on that particular campus could become members and participate in the association activities. Again, our membership is based on institution, so the institution had the overarching membership, but those individual people could fully participate in the activities of the organization, with the exception of holding office, I believe. So.
Okay. Another question from the chat. What is happening with the Antiracism Task Force?
So the task force submitted their final report a little under a year ago now. I believe it was January of 2021 when the executive board accepted that. But there's been a lot that's happened between now and then, and we continue to do work. One thing that we're actually currently wrapping up is a review of our diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. We've had one on the books, so to speak, for about a decade now, and so it was definitely time for us to review that, and pretty soon we should be able to roll out a revised version of that. There's a lot of things, a lot of other things that have been going on. There's some internal things in terms of how we run the organization, but then there's also some outward things in terms of webinars and podcasts and a lot of other activities that have been going on. One other major activity that's what came out of the task force recommendations was a review of our standards and the CAS standards, and making sure that the language included in those was inclusive, and that there was appropriate goals and proficiencies that folks in the field should have in the DEI area.
Thank you. Here's a question that was asked in advance of this webinar, and it says, other associations are hosting in-person meetings. Why has ACUHO-I decided to continue virtual programs through June 22?
There's actually a number of reasons for that. Certainly, foremost is the safety of our members, industry partners, and staff. Unfortunately, the Delta variant, the numbers are rising again across the country, and when we plan an event, we have to plan this 9 months to a year in advance. So not knowing where things are going to be this fall, and even into the beginning of 2022, at the time it was just prudent for us to make decisions to not come back in person quite so soon. A lot of it's based on member feedback in terms of, are they in a position to be able to leave their campus for an extended period of time for an event that we might host, and do they have the professional development dollars, particularly in this, a lot of us run a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year, and so would there be a lot of bandwidth financially for folks to do things that include travel costs as well as just registration costs. And some of it has to do with the contracts that we have with the different venues that we hold our events. We do have some flexibility with some of the locations and not so much with others. So that's one more factor that we have to take into account.
So Pete, in 2019, we had virtually, no pun intended, virtual programs. And here we are at the end of 2021, and virtually all of our programs are virtual. What is the board thinking about as we go into 2022? Will we go back to 100% in person, virtual? What are some thoughts from the executive board?
Yeah, we've learned a lot over the past, 18, 21 months, as we have on our campuses with our operations that we have our day-to-day work in as well. And While they were hard lessons to learn, there were some good lessons to learn as to how we conduct our business and engage with our members, during a period where we can't be face to face. That said, there's a lot of advantages to being face to face, and we absolutely will have face to face events again, starting with ACUHO-I in Pittsburgh in June. But the levels of engagement that we were able to get during this time of virtual, with events such as annual conference and exposition, with the October conference series, multiple times, so 2 and 3 times the amount of participation that we've had when we've had the in-person events. It's just given us an opportunity to reach so many more of our individual members and provide them opportunities not only to learn, but to engage with others and create those networks. So yes, we're looking forward to getting back to some good old-fashioned in-person events, but there's definitely going to be a place for those virtual events for those folks that have certain circumstances that getting together personally just isn't going to happen.
So here we are, Thanksgiving week, rounding out the end of 2021 in your presidency. What other educational programs are going on throughout the end of 2021, and what's happening in 2022?
So we have another live-in staff symposium next week. We had one earlier in the year that was very successful, and so we're holding another one of those, and registration is still open if folks are interested in participating in that. And then pretty much after the calendar turns to 2022, we'll be having a volunteer summit for our new volunteer leadership committee chairs, co-chairs, and then going on from there, going to the Senior Housing Officer Institute, the Mid-Level Managers Institute, and NHTI will round out the first half of 2022.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. I think we have answered all the questions in the chat and the questions that were submitted before the start of this webinar. Pete, I want to thank you for your service to ACUHO-I. I know this was not the year that you had anticipated, but it is certainly because of your leadership, steady hand, that the association has fared so well in 2022. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And for those of you who are in the United States and celebrating Thanksgiving, we're wishing you a safe and restful holiday.
Thank you, everybody.